Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is the third in the series of a special series that we're doing with Dr. Carrie Jones about the cortisol awakening response. In the first in the series, we heard about stress and why the cortisol awakening response and stress work so well together. In the last one, we talked a little bit about chronic conditions and how to understand how to use it. And in this one, we're going to go specifically into cases. So if you're listening to this audio, you could check it out on the video, but it was a really great half an hour, helpful for anyone who's dealing with a lot of chronic illness in their practice. Take it away. All right, so a warm welcome to the podcast, Dr. Carrie Jones. Welcome back, Doc.
Hey, this is great. This is going to be the third one, all about cases.
We're really excited. You know, the last 2 months we've been talking about cortisol awakening response, why it's important for assessing patients and their stress and getting into like how it affects disease. What I thought we could do for the third one is just go deeper into some case studies so people can see really what this is about. And particularly let's talk about really chronically ill patients because ultimately, for most of the clinics that we're working with, they're either seeing those kind of people or the people who aren't so chronically ill. You get them doing a little bit of lifestyle modification, you get them eating better, you get them sleeping properly, and the body is so incredible that it can just get us back to health pretty quickly. So I'd love to dive into some case studies. And just as a message, if you're listening to this on audio, and I know we have a lot of audio podcast listeners, but go over to youtube.com/functional forum if you really want to get the most out of this session, because I asked Carrie to put together some slides so that we could see some of these details. So if you're listening to this on audio in the car, maybe when you get home, you just want to check out the slides. But if you go to youtube.com/functional forum, we'll put all the slides up there. So Carrie, welcome and take it away.
All right, we've been really going into that cortisol awakening response, stress resiliency, autoimmune, memory recall, energy alertness. So let's tie it all together and let's summarize it into some cases. So some of the cases, I have a handful of cases. Some are more on the not so much simple or basic, but just like what we commonly see. And then I've got some autoimmune. So my first case is a woman. She's in her mid-30s, and she came in because she said I was having extreme morning anxiety. She said I have anxiety. I wake up and within seconds I have anxiety, and it's only in the morning. And she said I have really high stress going on in my life, but it's really debilitating. It's affecting the way I interact with my family. It's affecting the way that I get ready for work. It's sort of affecting everything, because imagine having debilitating anxiety first thing in the morning. So we ran her cortisol awakening response, and on the test, her waking point, so waking is immediately when she opened her eyes, her waking point was fine. It was right in the range where it should be. But within 30 minutes, her saliva cortisol shot up. It went from like this really high peaked mountain, and explained why she was having so much debilitating anxiety to a degree first thing in the morning, and then it went down through the rest of the day. And says she went down in the afternoon. It was actually on the lower end of the range, and at night also on the lower end of range. And I would ask her, do you have anxiety at night before bed? Nope, none. It was only in the morning. And once she got through her morning, once she kind of pushed through, then it gradually got better, and she could do her job, and she could move forward. So when you look at the research when it comes to anxiety and depression, it turns out those people have higher cortisol awakening responses. They have a hypervigilant cortisol awakening response. So if you're watching on the YouTube channel and you're looking at the slide, it's a study that showed controls anxiety, depression, and major depression with anxiety. And the reason that I chose this case is because so many functional practitioners work with depression and anxiety, right? Mood disorders. Patients come in and they go, I have really bad depression, I have really bad anxiety, and I don't know what to do. I don't want to take medication, and it's really affecting my life. So,
and if it's not the main complaint, then it's a sub-complaint, right?
Absolutely.
It's a secondary complaint.
Absolutely. And especially because it affects so many areas of their life. If you have rheumatoid arthritis and you have anxiety, rheumatoid arthritis and depression, Hashimoto's and anxiety, like it just compounds everything, and it just makes you never feel right in your body. So in the study that I'm showing, the controls, the normal controls of the cortisol awakening response, those with anxiety definitely go up. The cortisol awakening response peak increases. And if you have major depression and anxiety, it goes up even more, which is really quite interesting. And so it's really nice to have this data for her to say, like, look, your anxiety is a cortisol driven thing. And so for her, when I was doing the case review and working with treatment, for her, it was anticipatory stress. She had a very stressful job. She was actually in a very stressful time of her life. And her HPA axis, her sympathetic nervous system, was already chronically running on fight or flight, either low grade or high grade, depending on the time of day. And so we knew what the problem was right there. She did not drink that much caffeine, but she would sometimes just for something warm in the morning, or just out of habit, or because everybody else does. And so I said, hey, look, be very mindful of your caffeine in the morning, and just generally, just avoiding stimulatory medications or supplements. She didn't need those. She was already quite stimulated. Addressing sleep hygiene the night before is really important for the CAR. So reminding her to sleep in darkness, dial down before night, getting off her phone, using the blue light blocking glasses will help quite a bit. And then any calming activity or supplement that I did with her, she had to do within the first 30 minutes of waking. So what people will often do is they will say, here, patient or client, take this supplement in the morning. And what do people do? They get up, they check their phone, they deal with their family, they take a shower, and they move on with their day and have breakfast, and then they take their supplements. Or they get up, they check their phone, because obviously that's step 1 and step 2 for the majority of people. And then they take a shower, then they go to work, and then they have their supplements. But if you're trying to impact the HPA axis when it's the most active, then you have to do it within the first 30 minutes of waking. And for some of these people, I'm actually trying to substitute sublingual or topical or sprays that will get in and dissolve faster, as opposed to like a tablet or a pill. It doesn't always work out that way, but if I can, a tincture, something more liquidy that they can just get in right away. And it's also hopefully less likely to cause nausea. I know a lot of people say, well, I have to eat in the morning, otherwise I get nausea if I take my supplements. And for her, we were, breathing exercises right away, any kind of vagal nerve stimulation, humming, singing, cold shower, cold water splashes on her face, just all sorts of things to help lower her sympathetic response and push her into a parasympathetic. Any kind of meditation or journaling, I said you have to do it within the first 30 minutes, which then led to my final point, which was preparedness in the morning. If she's going to do these things in the morning and she knows she gets this debilitating anxiety that affects the way she can function, then I suggested, waking up a little bit earlier, and we had to break the cycle of when I open my eyes, I get anxiety, because that was the neuroplasticity, that was the pathway she's been laying down, and we had to break that. So by waking up a little bit earlier and immediately doing either vagal nerve things or doing a 5 or 10 minute meditation on her phone, taking her calming supplements, just sort of broke her pattern of when I wake up, I have anxiety, and then boom, she would have anxiety. Or when I wake up, I hope I don't have anxiety today. And so many people do that, right? They wake up and they go, I hope I don't. And then of course, by default, that's what happens. So these are the things we did with her to help. So let's move on to a next patient. Again, like I said, the last one was kind of more of a basic patient with anxiety, but such a prevalent symptom along even with depression that I wanted people to realize that the impact of the cortisol awakening response has on that. So the next patient's a woman in her early 40s. She has Hashimoto's, severe fatigue, and also has anxiety. And her Hashimoto's was not, in her opinion, it was not under control. She felt like she had a lot of symptoms as well. And with her cortisol awakening response, everything was pretty low. So she was just barely right in the range of normal, but not really. She was lower than she should have been. And as we know, when you have that lower cortisol awakening response from the earlier podcast, your risk of autoimmune or the autoimmune you already have being worse goes up, because you can't kill those cells in the thymus gland that fail central tolerance. Plus, when you have a low cortisol awakening response, you're not alert in the morning and you get all this severe fatigue, and that's what she had. Now, additional information on her that I happen to know about and thought was important to include as we're talking about her case. She is in her 40s and was anovulatory, so she had low progesterone. And she did have, in the luteal phase, she did have estrogen dominance. Not just relative to her progesterone, she actually had higher levels of estradiol than I would have liked to see. She was deficient in adenosylcobalamin, so the B12, that's more associated with the mitochondria, which of course goes a lot for energy. And on testing, she was higher in VMA, which is vinyl mandolate or vinyl mandelic acid, which is an indirect marker of norepinephrine and epinephrine on organic acid testing. So people will say, well, we just talked about the last case where the CAR was high. So this person's CAR is low. So where's her anxiety coming from? Well, she has a few things, right? Her progesterone's low compared to estrogen, and her estrogen was actually outright high. And we know that the alpha metabolite of progesterone is actually quite calming to the body. The alpha metabolite of progesterone is what crosses the blood-brain barrier, touches on GABA receptors, and helps increase GABA. So by losing progesterone, by not ovulating, she's losing that GABA support. She also has high VMA, and that's associated with norepinephrine and epinephrine. Not always, but given her anxiety, I'm assuming probably the case. She probably has higher norepinephrine and epinephrine levels in her body. She has Hashimoto's, and she doesn't feel it's very well controlled, so it's entirely possible thyroid issues are contributing to her anxiety. And of course, there can be other reasons, we just don't have time to go into on this podcast besides cortisol. So yes, cortisol can be a cause of anxiety, but don't rule out the other stuff. Make sure you're doing your due diligence and like really looking at her full picture to find out. So for her case, her CAR does have the right peak, but it is definitely way too low. And like I said, it affects Hashimoto's, which she complains of not being under control. It affects stress resilience, which she complains of, absolutely. Her low energy is likely probably because of that low CAR. In addition, she has low adenosyl B12, so mitochondrial issues right off the bat. And anxiety we talked about, low progesterone, increased norepinephrine, epinephrine, and possible thyroid issues. So we would have to work on all of these things. I would want to get her CAR up because I want her stress resilience to go up. I want her Hashimoto's to be, that central tolerance to be properly killed, right? I want the T cells that fail central tolerance to go through proper apoptosis versus just sort of sneaking out of the thymus gland. We'd work on why her adenosylcobalamin is low, work on, she's in her 40s, likely, not ovulating, not going to ovulate as she moves closer to menopause. So working on progesterone with her, working on, diet, lifestyle, sleep, all the main things as we work on that. And then I'll show you, actually, for those of you watching the slide, I'll actually show you her 6-month follow-up first. And in 6 months of doing this work, her cortisol awakening response looks like picture perfect normal. So I'm super proud of her for doing this and really making it happening. So that's great. But what I wanted to go back and just tell people when I get asked all the time, well, hers was low. Like, what do you specifically do, Carrie? How do you raise a cortisol awakening response? And if you listened on the first podcast that James and I did, if you remember, the CAR is directly affected by light. So I tell people, go outside and get some sunlight. Open your drapes immediately on waking, or buy full spectrum light boxes. And they're very inexpensive. You can find them online, just read the reviews, and get exposure immediately on waking. So instead of waking up and being on your phone, wake up and open your drapes. Wake up and go outside. Wake up and turn these boxes on. And you want that sunlight to hit your eyes. So, the full spectrum light to hit your eyes. Don't stare at the sun. Like, have some common sense. Let's not burn out the retinas. But like getting the exposure will help increase your CAR, which is what we're going for with her. And the CAR starts in the brain. So anything and everything you can do for brain health, do it. So movement and exercise on waking, avoiding EMF and Wi-Fi to the brain, getting regular acupuncture, chiropractic, or massage to the neck and back helps blood flow. Getting your blood sugar under control, stopping smoking, all of those things, like anything that helps, brain and blood flow to the brain is really, really important. Taking supplements, like I talked about with the first patient, within 30 minutes of waking, whether they're calming supplements or stimulatory or adaptogen, you want to do it in the first 30 minutes with those waking supplements, because you want to have the biggest impact on the HPA. And then, like with anyone, proper sleep hygiene. If the sleep the night before is terrible, then the car the next morning is going to be just as terrible. And I actually have I have a sleep apnea case that might be next. Look at that. Look how well that works out for those of you watching the YouTube video. So in this one, this is a male in his 30s, and this is so common and so severely underdiagnosed that getting sleep studies and getting sleep evaluation, I think, is critical for like more people than we realize. So he has severe sleep apnea, and he did not have it under control. He was not using a CPAP machine or any kind of device, but he knew he had severe sleep apnea. He was overweight, he had high blood pressure, he had fatigue on waking, and a great deal of depression. And I think this can sum up a lot of patients. And while this case happens to be male, it doesn't have to be male. It could absolutely be female. So severe sleep apnea, overweight, high blood pressure, waking fatigue, and depression. And there's a 2018 journal that says the hippocampus shows both damage and dysfunction in obstructive sleep apnea, which may contribute to memory, autonomic, and depressive symptoms in the disorder. And that's exactly what he had. His severe sleep apnea was affecting his weight. It was affecting, obviously, oxygen to the brain, therefore things like memory and energy. It was affecting his mood. It was affecting his heart, his cardiovascular system. It was his endocrine system. I mean, it's affecting everything, which just goes to show, please don't blow off snoring. Don't blow off sleep apnea. Don't blow off like, oh, I don't want to wear a mask, or I don't want to correct that. That's too embarrassing, because it truly is affecting your entire systemic body for the worse if you don't get it under control. And so the big takeaway for him is that was like, you have to address your sleep apnea. You don't have a choice. No supplement in the world is going to out-supplement the fact that you have severe sleep apnea and you're not getting oxygen to your brain, and it's just affecting everything downstream, because including his cortisol awakening response. And again, if you're watching on the YouTube video, I'm going to go back to show his pattern. His saliva cortisol pattern is kind of all over the board. He wakes up really low, which explains his fatigue. And then he shoots up. Now he goes into the normal range, but it's from below range to like a high shoot. And then he crashes back down. So within 60 minutes, he shoots up and crashes back down, which of course is going to affect blood sugar. It's going to affect inflammation. It's going to affect energy. It's going to affect, mood. It's going to affect everything. He spikes up in the afternoon again. And believe it or not, the reason he spikes up in the afternoon is he doesn't eat on a regular schedule. And so on the day of testing, he actually completely skipped eating. I was like, well, that's your cortisol actually doing its job, going up to help you break down glucose, and then it goes down at night. And so he's just all over the board. And again, like, can you give him supplements? Sure. But you know what the problem is? The problem is the sleep apnea, and you have to.
That's one thing I wanted to ask you about that, just with regard to testing. What are some of the best practices? Because I can imagine, my day is not the same every day. Right. Some days I forget to eat lunch, and some days I wake up late, and sometimes I wake up early. And ultimately, is this test, I guess it has the same fallibilities as a one-off test. It's better in that you're getting more data points, but also like, depending on what day you test, you're going to get different results. When you've gone through, I know you've done some pretty hardcore science on yourself, but have you found that when you do it, say a few days in a row, that the results are sort of in a zone where any one day is going to give you really good information?
Yeah. So on myself, so me as an N of 1, for the people who were listening back to the earlier podcast, when I talk about me doing the fasting mimicking diet, my day before, which is my baseline, and my 2 days after, which is where I'm in baseline again, are basically about the same. And my days are basically about the same. My schedule is roughly the same. Obviously, I have stuff if I'm traveling, if I don't know, get a migraine, if I can screw it up for sure. Or life can happen and it gets screwed up. But what I tell people when you're testing, try to test on a typical day. We actually had a practitioner who did their cortisol awakening response, and randomly, naturally, Murphy's Law, randomly the night before testing, they didn't sleep at all. They were like, it's one of the worst night's sleep I've had in a really long time, but it's when they wanted to do their car test, and they did it. And of course their car was a complete mess. And I said, hey, look, why don't we repeat this and let's try to do it on a normal day when you get normal sleep, and let's see what your normal looks like. But I had the data now from when you have really bad sleep, here's what your car looks like. And now let's do the opposite. Let's pick it on a normal sleep night and get, let's see what your car is. And if the car is still whacked out, then, that practitioner has problems. But if the car was much more normal, I'd go, look at this. Like, sleep has a huge impact, and I can prove it right here on your before and afters. So yes, I tell people, whenever you test, please try to do it on a typical day. Don't do it on vacation. Unless you want to know vacation. Don't do it on a weekend. Don't do it on your day off of work, unless that's what you want to know. But if you want to know your typical day, do it on a typical day for sure. So James, if you do your cortisol awakening response, I'm going to tell you to do it on your typical day. Although I don't know that you have typical days.
You'd be surprised.
So we'd have to plan that. Okay, this is a female in her 50s. This is a good one because the impact of lifestyle situation and memory, because she thought she was having dementia, getting Alzheimer's is what she said to me. I think I have Alzheimer's, Carrie. Very tired. She's in a very stressful divorce, and of course, naturally, she was having memory issues. So on her cortisol awakening response, her waking point was okay. It was right in range, and then she went down, and then she went down again. So instead of going up and down, she went down and down. So that explains the fatigue. But if you listen to an earlier podcast, you would know that also affects the memory. So for those of you maybe who are listening to this podcast and haven't had a chance to go back, I'll just recap you real quick. So the car has a huge impact on recall. Now, recall from the day before. If you don't get the morning rise in cortisol, then what research says, it inhibits free recall of previously learned content in texts and pictures. So if you read something yesterday or you saw something yesterday and you were trying to remember it today, but your car goes down instead of up, you might have a really tough time. And in her case, she's like, I feel like I'm getting Alzheimer's. I was trying to remember lists. I was trying to remember things I'd done the day before. I was even just trying to remember what I'd eaten. I had texted somebody, and then I couldn't remember who it was that I texted and like what I needed to follow up on. And like, I think this is a problem. I'm like, it is a problem, but it's directly related to the fact that you're not getting the laydown of memory in your hippocampus because you have that flat car. So she's in a stressful divorce, and I'm like, we just have to keep your head above water. We know what the problem is. We know what the problem is. And I told, just like everyone else, I said, whenever our resiliency herbs and nutrients that we're going to do first thing on waking. Because again, she goes down, 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 and we want her to go up. And then we're going to improve any kind of blood flow to the brain, because the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the pituitary, that's where it all kicks off. So as I've said before, exercise in the morning, helping getting that blood flow around to the brain. She wasn't a smoker, but this just is an FYI, stop smoking. Normalizing blood sugar. She actually because her car went down instead of up, she actually had a lot of morning blood sugar problems. The car going up will help release blood sugar in your system because you've been fasting. So it's to help sort of stabilize you until you choose to eat. It's a survival mechanism, which is great. But in her case, she didn't get it because hers goes down, not up. So she was having all sorts of blood sugar irregularities, hypoglycemic in particular. Other great things for the brain: neurofeedback, acupuncture, chiropractic, massage for blood flow, like I'd said. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy, HBOT. Testing for iron overload. I find this a lot, believe it or not, in men and in menopausal women. So make sure that you do test your men for hemochromatosis, test their iron, test their ferritin, and make sure you test your menopausal women, because what happens is when women get their periods, they bleed out their iron, and that's their stopgap. But once they become menopausal, they don't bleed every month, and now the iron starts to build up again. So just, especially if they have a family history or, and you suspect, don't be afraid to test iron in a menopausal woman or a man. And then, like I said before, reducing EMF, Wi-Fi, cell phone exposure to the head, that will just impact the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, and the pituitary. brain supportive supplements, resiliency type HPA adaptogens, which there's a lot of them out there. I'm not going to list them out because they're specific for her, but they can all be really, really helpful, especially when done, like I said, within the first 30 minutes. And then remember, light is everything. The sun and brightness is everything. So making sure for her, I was like, when you get up in the morning, I know you don't feel like it. I know you are tired, but you have to turn on your light box, or you have to sit out on your deck or your patio and open your blinds, get a little sun exposure, and retrain your body, retrain your brain that things go up in the morning. You want to go up in the morning, and that can be really helpful. So I hope with these cases, they kind of just sort of touched on a little bit of everything for people, like key symptoms in people, key things in people that they walk in your door with. And by knowing the cortisol awakening response, again, you get that just huge health insight for both longevity and resiliency, which is what we're all after.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I'm thinking when a really tough case comes in to a clinic, you got a lot of choices about what you could start with. And if you just, you know, probably the worst thing to do, just not clinically, but just from a practical standpoint, is try and address everything in the first visit, right? Because it's going to be a journey to get people back to health.
Yep.
You know, given the important role that the HPA axis plays in sort of regulating the whole system, seems to me that you know, that ultimately making improvements and changes in this area first, you know, one, it embeds a lot of the lifestyle stuff that you're trying to do anyway that is important for long-term health and building up resilience again. But secondly, you know, if you make changes in the communication system, then the downstream effects of, you know, all of those changes will be, you know, the body getting into a better, doing a better job of getting back to homeostasis.
Yeah.
And I'm always thinking about, you know, what is the simplest way to get people better? What is the simplest, most effective, most consistent, most cost-effective way to get people better? And ultimately, it seems to me that this, because of the central role that it's playing in regulating all the other parts of the body, that this might be a significant leverage point.
Oh, I think so, 100%. When I get asked a lot, what I would say my number one you know, like health, biohacker health thing is, like, you know, what's my favorite thing? I always say sleep and affect the circadian rhythm. Because if you can go down at night and up in the morning consistently in a healthy manner, it just sets the domino effect for so many things. Now, I do get the question a lot for those who are on night shift, and I understand that you are not down you know, at night and up in the morning. You have a flipped curve, and night shift workers, you know, we need you. God bless you. But wow, your circadian rhythm is kind of a mess. So you're going to work with somebody on that. But for those of you who are not night shift workers, if you can go to sleep, get good sleep, hit your REM, hit your deep sleep, get your nice melatonin release. I don't think people realize this, but we didn't talk about melatonin, but melatonin helps set the circadian rhythm, but not only the circadian rhythm, all your rhythms. So even your reproductive rhythm and your feeding rhythm. And so I find with women, when they say, I'm having all these reproductive problems, I'm irregular, I'm short cycle, I, you know, can't get pregnant, I start with sleep. And it's not always that easy, but a lot of times, you know, I find out their sleep is really not as good as they think it is, or they wake up several times in the night, or they can't fall asleep, or they, you know, they can't stay asleep, or they go to bed way too late. And so that's directly impacting their cycles, but they don't nobody puts two and two together. Nobody thinks like, well, I'm a night owl and I go to bed at 2 a.m. and I get up at, you know, 6 or 7 with my family, but nobody realizes like that shortens your melatonin output, which affects your reproductive rhythm. And like sleep is free. You don't have to, I'm not telling you to buy anything with sleep. I'm not telling you to buy supplements or, you know, fancy light things. Like just really focus on what you do at night before bed.
Yeah, no, ultimately, yeah, that's been a huge piece. Well, look, I really appreciate sharing this, and I think there's a lot to learn here from these. If you are listening to this on the audio, make sure to check out the videos on the YouTube channel, and you'll get all of the details there. Carrie, thanks so much for being part of this and for coming through with this series. You know, I really am excited to see that. that there's a shift underway from really understanding sort of disease and disease risk and really looking at, health and health optimization. And they have a lot of things in common, but ultimately it's a very different conversation. And
Right.
so I'm excited to see just how effective we can be in creating health in the humans that come into our offices. And I think it's a lot of good information for everyone. So thank you for this series. If this is the first episode that you've heard, there are 2 more on the YouTube channel and on the podcast. And this has been Dr. Carrie Jones. She is the Chief Medical Officer of DUTCH Test. If you want to find out more about measuring your cortisol awakening response and getting a lot of other awesome data that can help to flesh out some of the root causes of what's going on in yourself or in your patients, check out DutchTest.com. But in the meantime, this has been our 3-part series on the cortisol awakening response. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you want to learn more about it, please feel free to get in touch. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.